So today, first of all, we would like to share a couple of things about where we come from. So from Finland, maybe mostly you know, but it's there up north between Sweden and Russia. And if you look closer, that we say that Finland, it's like a Finnish lady with this kind of position. So you have one arm, and we are located at Jyväskylä, where the yellow star is. And our capital is where the red star is, so Helsinki. This is our beautiful faculty. It's designed by Alvar Aalto, which is one of the famous architectures in Finland and worldwide. And in our faculty, we have these are some of the details. We have nearly 100 ongoing projects and several publications during each year. And why we are very unique, I think, also worldwide, is that we have only one sport and health faculty of sport and health sciences. So if you are a PE teacher in Finland, a qualified PE teacher, you come from Jyväskylä and from our faculty.
First of all, we wanted to a little bit give some background, to draw some big picture of what we are talking about. And everyone knows that the culture matters pretty much. So we want to give some expression or some description of Finland and Finnish children compared to other countries, just to interpret the results correctly or better. So first, about the physical activity and support for being physically active. So probably most of you know Global Matrix study. It is the most comprehensive assessment of global variation in child and adolescent physical activity. And we have been part of this several times. And we have been graded pretty well in this matrix. So Finland is one of the most successful countries based on this global matrix. So there are very general indicators of physical activity and support for physical activity in children and adolescents. And it seems especially that they value the political level aims to promote physical activity. So there are national programs going on, and still, I think 10 years or more they started, and there are national programs to promote physical activity actually in all age groups, not only children and adolescents. You can't see what there is, but these are the domains of global matrix. So there are 12 indicators of physical activity and support for being physically active. And just highlighting, the higher the country is, the better grade there is. So just highlighting some countries there. Isaac is not anymore here, but and I don't know, not so many are from United States, but how Finland compares to some other countries. And the overall, you can see the right corner up, the overall grade, which is pretty high in this comparison.
That we wanted to show you some statistics about the motor competence, that how Finland is compared to other countries. And if you look at the first slide, this is unpublished work that we have been doing together with Clarice Martins and her team. But we have used in our data collection test of gross motor development, 3rd edition. But in this article or these slides, you will first see the 2nd edition, which has 6 locomotor skills and 6 object control skills. So what are the levels in children between 3 and 6 to 7 years old? So if we look at the next slide, you see Finland over here. So the databases that we have looked, they are very diverse in amount of children that are included. But you can see that Finland is the third one from that side. So from your left side. Yeah, so it's quite interesting to see these early years that we don't step up in a very different manner. But then if we go to Arto's slides, where you can see the comparison between Portugal, Belgium and Finland, you have a bit different perspective. And here the children are a bit older.
There are not so much differences in very early age, but then when we look at age range 5 to 9, there are some differences, and we did one comparison some years ago between Finland, Belgium and Portugal in motor competence, and probably you all or most of you know KTK test, if I can put it. So KTK test is a non-sport specific motor performance test. Using this measure, we can see pretty different kind of scatter plots in different countries. So actually the correlation between age and the raw score of this test is really remarkably different. So you can see very high correlation in Finland, moderate in Belgium, and not so strong in Portugal. And this was highly significant interaction between the age and the region country. And interestingly, we can see also interaction between BMI and country to the motor skill scores. So actually these are normalized values of the KTK test, and you can see that those obese and overweight children are developing relatively in line with normal weight children in Finland, but the case is a little bit different in Belgium and Portugal. So the differences are a little bit bigger, and they are increasing during the age. And this is another study of cycling, learning to cycle. So at what age children learn to cycle by bicycle? And Finland was the second in this comparison. So children are learning pretty early cycling skill, and new study shows that actually in Finland they are also bicycling in everyday life pretty much after learning to cycle. Yep.
Yeah, so we have looked the physical activity levels of Finland compared to other countries a bit. We have seen the motor competence levels. And then finally we have the perception of motor competence, which is very familiar to me. So I think that if we look at the physical activity and motor competence, you have already seen and heard how important the perceptions of motor competence are. So it's associated with these models of Stodden and all the work that researchers have done. So if we look at the perception of motor competence, we know that during the early years, the perceptions are quite high globally, everywhere, which is very typical for children, because if they, want to learn to walk and run, they fell down several times. So you can see the one line here, and every country report that in average the children before they go to school, they have mean and average of really good or quite good perceptions of motor competence. This has been done with the pictorial scale of Lisa Barnett.
To wrap up this big picture, everyone knows that even though things look great and wonderful, there is always, this is not the truth. So actually there are some points which are concerning us in Finland also. And more or less these are similar in every Western country. So basically the story is, when we look at Finland's these global matrix indicators, we can see that we are doing really well in early childhood. These indicators are green, so showing that we are doing really well with most of the children. But then indicators change red when we approach the adolescence. I think this is pretty universal thing, and we can see also in Finland. It is more difficult to keep good physical activity levels in adolescence. Even though government strategies and investments are great. So I think our maybe background of this presentation is that we need research-based understanding of the developmental changes in physical activity and motor competence to maintain, on the other hand, our good national situation, and also to provide possibilities for physically active and lifestyle formation from childhood and to adolescence and later. So this was our introduction to our presentation.
So we started our longitudinal study in 2015, and we didn't know at that time that it's going to be a longitudinal study. We only hoped that. So why this data, I think it's quite good, is that we had the opportunity within one country to have a quasi-representative data sample in diverse kind of locations within Finland. So we had the northern, central and southern part of the country. We had categorized also the childcare centers based on residential density. So if they lived in metropolitan areas or Helsinki, if they lived in cities, rural areas or countryside. And I hope that every one of you could, somehow reflect the situation in your country based on these kind of characteristics that can be very different in every child's life when we think about the environmental where the child lives. So the baseline data, taitavat tenavat, so skilled kids, was carried out in 15-16, and that is the data that I did my PhD on. We went to 23 different localities, and we visited nearly 40 childcare centers. And in time point 1, the children are 3 to 7 years old. The second time point, we search obviously the same children, now in 100 different schools, and you can imagine how that is challenging in the data collection. So we had, in this time point, we had the children from 6 to 11 years old. And then a couple of years ago, we finished our data third time point, always in the same, looking for the same children, and in that time point 3, they are 9 to 13 years old.
So, and the variables which we're examining and trying to examine the developmental mechanisms behind, they were based on the socio-ecological model on child level, family level, environmental level, many measures related to children's behavior, physical activity behavior. A lot of parental questionnaires, also field measurements for children, and that's the main data collection ways. Yep. And the key study questions in these presentations are what explains development of physical activity, motor skills, and perceived motor competence in childhood, and on the other hand, parenting-related issues, how the parenting influence changes in physical activity and what factors contribute to development of physical activity parenting. And we start off the first.
Yeah, so if we look at our baseline data, so time point 1, when the children are 3 to 7 years old, we saw that if we look at the motor competence, where we had the locomotor and object control skills, there are some very interesting findings that first of all, in countryside, the children living in the countryside outperform the other children based on the level of motor competence. The second interesting thing in here, I think it's the gender differences. So in cities and in metropolitan area during the early years, we found greater differences between the genders than in rural areas or countryside. And then when we look at the 3 years later, the situation, it's the opposite. So the cities and children living in the metropolitan area and in cities, they outperform other children in their level of motor competence. And the situation in countryside children is quite dramatic, like they don't, after entering to school, somehow their level of motor competence does not increase in the same way than in cities and bigger areas.
Related to these background results, our one PhD student, Maria Kasanen, did her dissertation 1 year ago, actually graduated, and I give just one example, maybe interesting example in international context of her dissertation. So one of her article was, the topic was association, bidirectional association, longitudinal association between BMI and FMS. So between BMI and motor performance, motor skills, because internationally we have seen that BMI and motor development, they are related pretty strongly. The motor competence was measured by TGMD3 object and locomotor skills, not all full battery, but four items from there. And we used and age standardized BMI values. And the main result basically was that there is a strong stability in both of these variables, both motor competence and weight status. They are highly tracking across the years, and it was the main result that they are not at all related in this sample. This is contrary to many international samples or results, but we couldn't see any relationship either from motor skills to weight status or from early childhood weight status to later childhood motor competence. Yeah.
At the same time, I think it's very important to think about our data samples and how they are. And we know that in our data, even though it is quite representative of Finland, but we struggle to get those children that are not that competent or interested about physical activity that can have also overweight. We struggle to get them into our studies. So from a longitudinal perspective, we jump now a bit on the time point 1, so the cross-sectional results about free time activities during the early years. And if we see the residential density based on the children's use of time, so if they, the time spent outdoors in here, it's related to outside of childcare center. So this is like the time that they spend afterwards during the evenings outdoors. And we saw that in countryside, the children spend more time outdoors, and also in cities, boys tended to spend a lot of time outdoors. And if we look at the second slide or phase of the free time activities, so the participation in organized sports, that was very popular in metropolitan areas, especially. So I think that this is one of the key elements that if we look at the environments where our children live, we need to understand that we have differences within countries and in different countries, if it's safe or possible to stay, for example, outside. In our data, we know that both time spent outdoors and also participation in organized sports are correlated with better motor skills. And if we look the differences, so here in one picture you see two important things. Firstly, if you look at the number of children in our data which participate in organized sports, it's very high. So you must remember this fact. But if we look at the blue bar, yes, thank you, Arto, you will see that in countryside there is less opportunities and less possibilities within these 3 years to participate in organized sports. So if in other regions in metropolitan area and cities there is like 20% of more organized sport activities within these children, in countryside it's only 13%.
And another PhD student, Nanne-Mari Laukkanen, was a little bit looking more deeply this balance between organized sport participation and non-organized participation to behavioral outcomes. So we were interested of the general amount of physical activity and where does it come from? Organized, non-organized, and whether does it matter which combinations the overall activity comes from. So, because there are some reasons to be interested of this question, but Nanne-Mari in the final article of her dissertation did profile analyzing and found 4 profiles in the sample. So they were high organized sport participation group of children, so they had at least 2 or more sports to participate in early childhood already, and through the primary school years. And they were also high outdoor players. So parents are reporting all time points how much they are spending outdoors, and we in Finland know that this is indicator of physical activity very strongly. Another profile was multisport and moderate outdoor time, and third was one sport participated and low outdoor time, and finally low sport participation and high outdoor time, this kind of groupings. And what are the behavioral outcomes of this kind of profiles? We found out, not surprisingly at all, that of course if you do much everything, then it's likely related to positive behavioral outcomes, physical activity, fitness, motor skills. And second highest was the multisport group, who was moderately outdoors, both fitness and motor skills. And maybe new thing in this article is what we can find here is that one sport participated during the childhood years with low outdoor time indicated lowest physical activity compared to other profiles. This was considered moderate to vigorous physical activity. On the other hand, it seems that it is beneficial to participate in organized sports when it comes to fitness and motor skills, because we found some significant differences compared to this profile also. So these are the main findings of Nanne-Mari's dissertation.
Yeah, so one of the questions that we had in our earlier presentation is that what factors relate to perceptions of motor competence? And one of the things that I want to highlight is that we found that lower age and higher actual motor competence explained most of the children's skill perceptions. Other findings that we have, they are a bit like details. So the developmental phase that young children have high perceptions really come to life in our data. And the other hand, if a child has higher actual motor competence, the skill level itself reflects very highly to his or her actual motor competence. If we look at the second slide, what we wanted to go from cross-sectional studies to future direction, which is that we should shift from correlations and cross-sectional studies to a person-centered approach using longitudinal data. And what we have found in our data is that if we look at the perception and actual motor competence profiles from early to primary school years, first of all, we noticed when using profile analysis that we need to do gender-specific profiles because somehow the profiles are different. And then if we look at the boys' profiles, during early childhood, we found that there is overestimation profile, there is realistic estimators where you have medium level or average level of actual motor competence compared to other children, but you are very, very realistic in your evaluations. And also boys had realistic estimators in the low level of motor competence and perceptions. 3 years later, the same children, we see the developmental stages that overestimation become less evident. But one of the key findings, if you click more and more, is that you see that the realistic estimators low profile, if you click 2 times, yeah. Here, it's quite stable. If you have, during early years, low perceptions of your skill levels, even though they are realistic, it tends to remain. If we look now at the girls' profiles, we had similar, but not, 2 of the profiles were similar, so that we had the overestimation profile, we had the realistic estimators in medium level, but then we had those children that had average level of motor competence. However, these girls underestimated their skills. And 3 years later, we saw that there still existed these same profiles. And if you click the directions, we see that overestimation becomes not so like declines. But again, if you have low perception, even though your skills are in average level, in girls, they tend to think that they have lower skills than others. So I think this is one of the things that we must pay attention to, the importance of the early years perceptions.
Then we still have the second research question, more related to physical activity parenting. which has been my passion since my master thesis 2010. Since that I have been more or less worked with this topic, and here we have one model which has affected to our parenting related research a lot. I go a little bit step by step this through. This was published by Davison et al. 2013. So this is integrated model of physical activity parenting. So we can, in the model, of course, the arrows goes from parenting to child's physical activity behavior and other activity-related behavioral outcomes. Direct association from parenting, but also the model assumes that there are indirect paths through child's physical activity attribute and perceptions like motivation, physical self-perception, physical literacy also modified by our research group. And of course the parent, okay, so there is pretty strong and consistent previous research evidence that, okay, this direct association exists. We can see not so high correlations overall, but they are still consistent. Parental modeling of physical activity is consistent, correlate pretty low, but especially parental support for children's physical activity seems to be moderately associated. And if we look at the support physical activity parenting, we can, and the literature is a little bit confusing and there are different conceptualization of this concept, but we have been using the self-determination theory-based concepts, which are like structure, autonomy, support, and involvement. And basically, structure answers the need for competence, autonomy, support for autonomy, and involvement for the need of relatedness. And many times I explain this, that structure means the actual support, what happens really, for example, co-participation with child, and autonomy, support, and involvement consider more like how the support is provided. And of course, many kind of parent-related variables, aspects, of course, influence how the parental support is provided. And more widely, there was the arrow back from the children to parenting. So the model also proposes that this association is bidirectional. And more widely speaking, of course, the whole socio-ecological system context, whole society affects the parenting and parental support and the family's life. And the last thing is that there are proposed to be some parent and child attributes as potential moderators of the associations. We go step by step some of those hypotheses through. And during the past years, using these same data sets, I go through 4 hypotheses. So first hypothesis maybe is really interesting, is that this is bidirectional association. Actually, children are affecting parenting and parenting affects children. So first quick look of that thing. Methods all told already using the same data sets than in all other studies presented. We can go to first to from parenting to the child's physical activity. So from early childhood to early primary school years. First, whether parents' own physical activity explains child's physical activity. This is parent-reported physical activity levels. So parent-reported levels of physical activity are not related at all. Parental support, on the other hand, explains remarkable proportion of the child's physical activity. Remember, this is parent-reported. Another way, child's physical activity explains a significant proportion of parents' own physical activity 3 years later, and also the parental support for child's physical activity. So there seems to be some evidence for the bidirectionality. Another study what we have been doing is what is related, correlates and predictors of physical activity parenting. And this study is based on the correlates of physical activity paper which was published some years ago, and basically the same methods are now used to this study. And we were looking at the predictors of physical activity parenting on the sociological levels. Child level, we can see that the age effect is there, so parental support decreases during the childhood years. Enjoyment of physical activity is also associated. Child's temperament, so agreeing children more likely get parental support later. And also the child's use of sport and physical activity facilities near the home are predicting higher support. On family level, offsprings get highest parental support. First, children in the family. The younger brothers and siblings, they get less. Nuclear family is associated with higher parental support, and also the parents' own frequency of exercising. And we didn't find any environmental level predictors of physical activity parenting. And altogether, this explained pretty remarkable part of the parenting 3 years later. So in summary, there are the same things which I already explained. Yeah. So we can say that this bidirectional assumption is pretty much true. There is pretty much evidence for this one. The second hypothesis which we were interested in is whether parenting is associated to child physical activity attribution and perceptions, and physical self-perception has been studied in our study. So we looked at that.
Elina Mecklin, nowadays Sarkkinen, has a focus on motor creativity. But in this published article, Elina looked at how does the physical activity parenting predict child perceived motor competence later on. And we looked at the locomotor sports and ball skill sports to perceived motor competence. If we just go 2 slides straight, yeah, we can go to the results. So what we found was that in girls, if in early years they had physical activity parenting, that predict better perceptions of motor competence 3 years later. And also we saw, you can just go, yeah, and one more. So we saw that if the child was participating in one ball sport, that was also a predictor of better perceptions of motor competence. But if the girl was in 2 or more ball sports, that in somehow predicted lower perceptions. And then if we look at the boys, so we didn't find these clear associations or predictors, only that the actual motor competence levels at time point 1 predicted better perceptions in 3 years later. And also, surprisingly, which is quite typical in our data because we have a lack of obese children. So the higher BMI and also the less access to electronic devices in time point one was predictor of better perception of motor competence 3 years later. Yeah. Yeah. So again, we saw that in physical activity parenting, children or girls, like the physical activity parenting was predicted of better perception of motor competence in girls, but not in boys. So we have to somehow look at these gender differences also.
Yes, so and there is previous research on this topic which shows that there is in association between parental influence on the child's perception of physical self. So we can that there is pretty consistent evidence, although some sex or gender differences may exist in this association. Okay, yeah, and then maybe one of the most interesting thing, whether we can see the mediation or moderation through these more or less psychological constructs to overall physical activity, because I think this is very strong hypothesis have be assumed in everyday life, that we are giving good values for the children and they are gonna have physically active life for the rest of the life. That's the general assumption, and whether there is any evidence for this assumption. In one study on this topic, we used accelerometer physical activity as an outcome there, and we didn't actually see longitudinal significant association from parenting to MVPA, but when we looked at the moderation and mediation effects, we found some very interesting thing there. There was no mediation effect, but when we look at the children who has high perceived motor competence in early childhood, it seems like there is no matter if the parental support is high or low during the years. Children are physically active, that kind of children. There is no matter. But the difference comes from the children who perceive themselves as weak in motor competence. Those weak children who get parental support are remarkably more physically active later in primary school. And sad thing, of course, is that if they don't get the parental support, they are remarkably less physically active. So my maybe practical interpretation of this result is that these children who has perception of weak competence, they might have challenges to make friends in association with physically active play and games, for example, and parenting might be needed more in these cases. And there are also some other interpretations of this result. There is some previous research which shows actually mediation effect between parenting and child physical activity. And our initial just pure new result actually shows at age of 9 to 13 that physical literacy measure which we have been using is mediating this association. So we can conclude that there is evidence for both mediation and moderation mechanisms of this one. Yeah.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes.
Yeah. 3 minutes, and last one, maybe I skipped this one, but we were interested whether the child interpretation of physical activity parenting was moderator of associations The problem was that there is no valid measures for measuring children's perception. And we used a couple of years to develop and validate measures for this purpose. And nowadays we have valid measure, and we are doing pretty nice international collaboration with this measure. So this measure is also already validated in China population. Now the project is beginning in Turkey, and hopefully also from Italy we get validation for this measure. Some comparisons were also already made for the measure. I skipped out that one. Yeah. Actually, the result at the moment is that it seems not to be a moderator. So parents' perception of parenting seems to be the important thing, at least in Finnish children. Yeah.
So summary of the findings, if we first think about the big picture of physical activity, motor competence, and perceived motor competence. So the Finnish culture provides excellent environment for children's physical activity, and especially during the early years. However, still remarkable changes are faced to maintain healthy level of physical activity and development of motor competence in adolescence. And we need to understand the developmental mechanism behind rapid changes. And I think this is like a global thing as well. Then if we look at what explains the development of physical activity and motor skills in childhood, we see that they are associated during early years and longitudinally to possibilities to participate in organized sports and to time spent outdoors. The residential density within one country can influence the opportunities to participate in organized sports and also globally. The development of BMI or motor skills seem not to be associated in Finnish children at age range 3 to 11 years. And balanced participation in organized sports and non-organized physical activity or sports has remarkable influences on physical activity, motor skills, and fitness. Then, if we look what explains the development of perceptions of motor competence in childhood, lower age and higher actual motor competence explained most of the children's level of skill perceptions. With age, children become more realistic in their evaluations, and the most beneficial factor of realistic perceptions is to have possibilities to enhance motor competence through physical activity, sport participation, and time spent outdoors. And we need to really understand how important the perception of early years is, because there is that kind of prediction that these children with low perceptions might feel the same way afterwards.
Yeah, and I think we already remember the key messages of this part, and we can go to lessons learned part.
Yeah, so we have a young research field, and we need to do measure validation, as in this Congress. Also we have seen very nice presentations about different measures. We are creating the physical activity parenting and motor creativity assessment tools. Then we have the ethical issues, what we were talking about. So do we reach the children in all backgrounds? We have the quick societal change. So if we do want to see the changes or do longitudinal research, it's difficult to pick the right measures. For example, the development of iPhones and so on have been very dramatic during the 10 years.
Yeah, from the family systems, family parenting issue, I think there are a lot of things which we still need to research, and one thing is that we don't know exactly or anything about parents, father's role in parenting. That's huge gap of the evidence, because mothers are those who answer the questionnaires. They participate mostly also in Finland. I think this is pretty universal thing. And on the other hand, we know parents, probably they have a role in this play. And lastly, academic careers. We have, of course, many duties to answer what we do with the time. That's one issue we have been facing many times. Just closing picture of the Finnish recommendation of physical activity, the early years. So the message is that the whole village raises children. The whole village supports physical activity. And that's the key message to all of this presentation. Okay. Thanks for the attention.